Okay, so the plan is, today is Wednesday. Missing a few kids for the thing, I think, right? So for the musical. So today we're going to finish the notes over Module 18. Thursday, tomorrow, I am going to start talking about the Roosevelt administration. And same thing on Friday. Monday will be a review day, and Tuesday we'll take the test. Good? That's the plan. Okay. All right. So to wrap up, we're going back across the pond and talk about foreign policy. Yes, ma'am. Study guys been on campus. Yes, ma'am. Yep. I will provide some for you on Monday if you don't have one printed off. Okay. I would recommend, like over the weekend, just open your laptop, open Module 17, read through it. Module 18, read through it. Do that a couple times over the weekend. We get to Monday, more of it's just gonna stick. Okay. So I just take time over the weekend before you go to bed, read through the notes a couple times. Okay. All right. So this is your birthday. August 27th, 1928. Now, we're back to Coolidge here for a little bit. 1928. Coolidge, his Secretary of State is Frank Kellogg. Okay? And then there's this French guy named Aristide Briand. And he's got this wonderful idea that we could prevent war from ever happening again if we could just get nations to agree. Now, Kellogg doesn't like this idea. Coolidge doesn't like this idea. But there's a bunch of members of Congress that do. So they invite the Frenchman, Aristide Briand, to address both houses of Congress. And he gives this speech about world peace and this agreement that we could do to create world peace in 1928. And the American people listen to this speech on the radio. And like, we like this idea too, because we are now what? Americans are what? When it comes to foreign policy, we're isolationists. This is a way to secure that isolationism. So Kellogg and Coolidge go along. 60 nations will sign. And yes, Japan signs this. Yes, Germany signs this. France, Britain, Italy, 60 biggest countries sign it. Okay? To renounce war as an instrument of their national policy in relations with one another, except in matters of defense. Okay, this is the point in time where we remember your birthday, because that was the day, ladies and gentlemen, that the human race got together and they outlawed war. Now, let's gather around, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya. You ready? My Lord, Kumbaya. No, it doesn't work, okay? Now, if one of these nations, i.e., maybe Japan, violates this and attacks another country, i.e., maybe China in 1931, does it mean the other 59 nations are going to war with Japan? No. Now, had that been on the piece of paper, maybe Japan doesn't invade China in 19. But that wasn't on the paper. The only thing holding this together is the moral force of world opinion, which really doesn't mean that much. Okay? Ask Trump. He doesn't care. Okay? What other people say. So, it's a piece of paper, guys. Here's the Kellogg Grant Pact. 60 signatures. It's a piece of paper. That's all it is. So when historians look back at the Kellogg-Briand Pact, they use terms like naive, childish, okay? giving ourselves a false sense of security. Guys, listen, everybody signed it. So we don't have to worry about what's going on overseas. We can pull the covers over our heads. We can stick our heads in the sand. We don't have to worry about it. Because Landon, everybody's on board. So this is going to allow us to retreat further into isolationism. Now, you guys know we're already being isolationist with tariffs, economically, cutting ourselves off with tariffs. Now we're going to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world politically, militarily. Okay? Now, in the 1920s, there was relative peace on Earth. Okay? There wasn't a lot of war. There were no big wars. Okay? But the 1930s, as the Depression sets in, our leadership is needed, and it's not there. Okay? So, just to add to this, we talked about this earlier. In 1922, Mussolini comes to Italy, brings fascism, talks about building a new Roman Empire, and this is where France, out of self-preservation, violates the Five-Power Treaty and starts to rebuild its navy. Now, why am I talking about that? Because, guys, the French Navy during the 20s and 30s will grow into a formidable navy. Okay? Now, let's think forward. Does anybody know who defeats France in 1940? In World War II? Who defeats France in 1940? Germany. Guys, what happens to the French Navy when Germany takes over France? That's going to be a problem. Okay? So, that's why we're talking about it. Okay? So, Kellogg-Briand, and I might even add this, Kellogg-Briand would have little or no positive effect. Okay? Because it gives you a false sense of security. All right? And really allows us to sink deeper into isolationism. Okay. Now, I know you guys have been wondering, since I started talking about this stuff, right? Especially when it comes to foreign policy. You're wondering to yourself, Mr. Ebright, what's going on in Latin America during this time period? Right? And what is going on with Latin America? Yeah. A lot of banana republics. Okay. Well, usually when a banana republic popped up, Landon, you know what we did? And we didn't like that banana republic. Our answer generally was this: send in the Marines. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about next. Are you good? On the notes here? Okay. All right. Oh. Okay. Now, Americans love business, okay? And rich Americans like to invest and make more money. So over time, American businesses, individuals had gone into Latin America and invested, bought property, built plantations, sugar fruit plantations, places like Dominican Republic. And if the government there interfered with American business interests down there, what was the answer? Send in the Marines. Nicaragua in 1912, 1925, we didn't like the government they elected down there. So what's the answer? Send in the Marines. Now, after a while, the United States starts to look like this. This is the United States. This is Latin America. This is what it starts to look like. Like the United States being a bully. Okay? So, Mexico. Like in Saudi Arabia, in the early 20s, I guess in Mexico a little bit before that, they discovered that Mexico has a lot of oil under their feet. Okay? Now, Mexico didn't have the technology at the time to develop those oil fields. So who do you call? You call Rockefeller, who runs what company? Standard Oil. You call Texaco Oil and say, hey, come down here. And will you help us find this oil? Drill for it, extract it? And they said, yeah. In fact, what we'll do is we'll buy the mineral rights and then help you extract it. So the American companies kind of came down and bought mineral rights. Now, have any of you guys watched this show, Landman, on Apple? Okay. So one of my buddies, his son, is a landman in Kansas. So he drives around Kansas. He visits different farms and stuff, people's land, visits with people and says, hey, who owns the mineral rights under your property? Because there's the land that you own, and then there's the mineral rights under the land you own. So you can buy the mineral rights from underneath somebody. Okay? That's what land, and explore for oil. Now, the landowner is going to get a cut of the oil profits. You understand? So, same thing if you put a windmill on somebody's property out in western Kansas, or a cell tower, you let them use the land, and they pay you. Bishop Carroll gets paid every month for that cell tower that sits out by the stadium. You guys know that? Well, hell, let's put another one up. Let's make some freaking money on that, okay? Is there any oil under Bishop Carroll? Let's freaking drill for some oil out there. Yeah. In between the softball and baseball field, right there. So, we went down there and did that. And then in 1970, as we were chasing Pancho Villa around northern Mexico and then get involved in World War I, Mexico declares all the oil deposits, mineral rights, belong to Mexico, not the American oil companies. Now, normally, our response would be what? Come on, guys. I'm working here. Send in the Marines. But guys, we're sending the Marines where in 1970? To France. Yeah. Okay. So do we want a war with Mexico in 1917? No, we can't really afford it. You guys remember that thing called the Zimmerman telegram? Oh, dang. That was Germany sending a thing to Mexico. At the same time, they're doing expropriation, taking private property from American businesses. Maybe we will have war with Mexico, but we didn't. Okay? Now, they don't actually enforce this expropriation, okay, which means seizing private lands by a government, okay, until 1925. Now, by 1925, America is what? We are what? Starts with an I and it ends with an ism. Or ists. We're isolationists. We're going to go to war with Mexico. No. Okay? So in 1927, we passed a peaceful settlement. Okay? Now, not before United States, Great Britain, because you guys know what BP stands for? BP? See the BP gas station? What's that stand for? BP. Not batting practice. British Petroleum. Okay? So British Petroleum was down there in Mexico too. And so were the Netherlands. So United States, Britain, and the Netherlands all boycotted Mexican goods for a couple of years. And that's about all that came up. Okay? So they call it the Fiesta Patrias of Mexico. When Mexicans celebrate the date where the president of Mexico, General Lázaro Cárdenas, declared that the oil reserves in Mexican soil belong to the nation. Okay? So, we didn't go to war. Fast forward to Hoover in Latin America. So we got Coolidge in Latin America, and we got Hoover in Latin America. So Hoover comes in 28, after Coolidge, 29, and he's got a new Secretary of State. His name is Henry Stimson. Henry Stimson. Okay, so the Stimson Doctrine, they want to improve relations with Latin America, okay? Mirrors the Monroe Doctrine. And this is an honors class, right? So I imagine everybody in here remembers the Monroe Doctrine from last year, right? B, you remember the Monroe Doctrine? A little bit? Remember what it said? Anybody want help? You're talking hemispheres is the right thing to be talking about. So you got two of those, right? You got the Eastern and Western. So basically, Monroe Doctrine said, Europe, stay out of our hemisphere. We'll stay out of your hemisphere. Okay? Now, guys, just show you the next slide real quick. Okay. So guys, this shows a lot of American involvement in Latin America and the Caribbean. Okay? I'll go over these in a second. So what Stimson Doctrine says is we're going to stay out of your business. We're not going to send in the Marines anymore. We want to be friends. Okay? We want to rebuild those relationships. We've been a bully. We've acted like a bully. We're going to stop being a bully. Okay? So the U.S. has no right to intervene in neighboring states except when American lives are at stake. Okay? We would accept South American political life whether we liked it or not. You guys, this will last into about the 1950s. Roosevelt, when he's elected, is going to double down on this. Roosevelt has something called the good neighbor policy. Okay? And I'll just go ahead and spoil this, but Roosevelt's going to be the first president of the United States to hop on an airplane. The airplanes are kind of new, okay? And he's going to fly to a foreign country to visit with another head of state. First country he flies to is Mexico, flies to Mexico City, and meets with the Mexican president. Okay? That's the first time a president ever flies on Air Force One, although there was no Air Force. Okay. I don't know what they call it. The president's plane. Okay? Now, I'm going to come over here, guys. I want to show you something. Come on. Come on. Come on. Okay. Now, the United States is a two-ocean nation. Yes? If everybody in our hemisphere is our friend, then the United States never has to worry about an invasion unless it comes from across a freaking ocean. Okay? So, this is what we're attempting to do, is build relationships and friendships. So, Hoover starts it with Stimson, okay, Secretary of State, and Roosevelt will double down on it. This will pay dividends. In World War II, every single country in the Western Hemisphere will declare war on the German, Italian, Japanese Axis power. Now, Argentina had some pro-fascist stuff going on there. They were the last ones. Okay? They were kind of waiting to see who was going to win before they chose sides. They were the last ones to declare war. Okay? Now, don't worry about Argentina. They're in good hands right now. You like that guy? Milai, or whatever his name is. You guys know what I'm talking about? Their new president. This guy's outstanding. Love this guy. Anyhow. All right, so this is going to pay off. All right, now today, let's fast forward to 2025. Is everybody in our hemisphere our friend? Who's not our friend? Venezuela and our friends. We're having a little tiff right now. Okay. Cuba. Okay. You said it, Eisman? I'll give you credit. It's a communist country. Venezuela is a socialist country run by a dictator. His name is Maduro. Okay. On the immigration front, or deportation front, Maduro has actually sent Venezuelan planes to pick up deportees. Okay. Now, Biden made it legal again to get a visa to go to Cuba. We don't trade with them. We do send them some food, but we trade some food, but we don't have normal trade relations with them. It haven't since 1958. Okay, so they're still driving 57 Chevys over there. Okay, they got to rebuild the engines and stuff. But they have a bunch of gold classic cars in Cuba. If you go down there, classic American car from the 1950s. Okay, all right. So, all right, last slide. Well, just real quick, guys. So Cuba, that was Spanish-American War. We intervened 1898 to 1902. 1901, 1906, we intervened in Cuba again. And then in 1917, briefly. Veracruz, Mexico, we sent troops there in April of 1914. Nicaragua, 4 different times. Haiti, a couple different times. Dominican Republic, a couple different times. We took Puerto Rico and the American Virgin Islands in the Spanish-American War. Okay, so if any guys want to go on vacation, you don't have a passport, you want to go to the Caribbean, you guys can travel to Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands without a passport. Okay, which is kind of nice. Panama, obviously, some intervention there, 1903. Okay, so guys, we're kind of being a bully in the neighborhood, all right, and we try to repair that. Okay. Now, as we get to the 1950s, when Cuba falls to communism, and then there's some communist movements in Central America, the CIA is going to get involved, and we're going to run guns, and we're going to get involved, okay, especially the CIA. Now, all right, guys, this slide here is very important. Okay, I want you to generalize yourself with this geography here, equate yourself to it. Okay, this is Japan. This is the Korean Peninsula. All of this is China. Okay, so if you look at a map over here, okay, Japan, Korean Peninsula, all of this is China. So today you can see this northern region of China. Now, China uses what are called provinces. Okay, like Canada, they have provinces. And this northern province is called Manchuria. All right? Now, little history catch you up here. There was a war between Russia and Japan called the Russo-Japanese War at the beginning of the 20th century, 1901. At the end of that conflict, between Japan and Russia. Japan retained possession of this peninsula, Korea. Okay, so basically from 1903 to 1945, the end of World War II, Japan will control Korea. Okay, so if you talk about like one group of, Asian people that may not care so much for another, the Koreans for the Japanese. Okay, and the Chinese for the Japanese, for that matter, which we're about to talk about. Okay, so in 1931, guys, we've had almost a decade of peace, or a little over a decade of peace. That peace is going to be broken. I foreshadowed that a little bit earlier. In 1931, the Japanese army will create an incident along the border of Korea and Manchuria, China. Using that incident as an excuse, they will invade China. Okay? The peace is over. Now, let me remind you that Japan, just 3 years earlier, on your birthday, signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And they just went on the offensive. Okay? Now, Manchuria is going to become a puppet state. So basically what that means is you leave the Chinese leaders in charge. Feed them wine and women, song, and they do what you tell them to do, like a puppet. Okay? There's a pretty good movie on this called The Last Emperor. Okay? So the Japanese left the Chinese emperor here in charge, but they told him what to do. Okay? And he was very young. So the Japanese go in. Peace is shattered. Now, you guys remember the Treaty of Versailles ended World War I. And Woodrow Wilson had an idea at the end of World War I for an international organization that would try and keep the peace between nations. What was the name of that international organization? League of Nations. Did the United States join the League of Nations? You know who did? Japan did. China did. Most countries joined. But as you'll recall from government class last semester, in order for the United States to join a treaty, the United States Senate must approve it by 2/3. They got 14 votes to join the League of Nations. The United States Senate said, nope, we're not joining this international organization. We're not having the sovereignty of the American people controlled by an international organization. So we didn't join. But we had an American observer at the League of Nations because we don't have an ambassador. The Chinese delegation showed up for that meeting of the League of Nations. That on the agenda was to condemn Japan for its invasion of China. The Chinese delegation is sitting in the League of Nations, and all these countries are denouncing them for invading China. And then they vote to outlaw Japan. Now, guys, I'm not sure what that means. How you outlaw a country. But they did. So, the Japanese, this is on video, you can pull it up. Japanese delegation, there's two of them. They close up their paperwork, they stand up, and they walk out of the League of Nations. The place is dead silent. Who is going to go to China and stop the Japanese? Is the United States going to go? Stop. What? No. Well, 10 years later, when we were attacked by Japan, is the Soviet Union going to go to China to stop the Japanese? No. Is Britain going to go? Slave. Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming. Now, guys, this is 1931. Hoover is president. His Secretary of State that we've already talked about, Simpson, says we should put economic sanctions on Japan. We should stop trading with them, and we should encourage other nations to stop trading with them and punish them for this invasion, like we do with Iran. Hoover says no. He doesn't want to provoke a conflict with Japan. So what consequences will Japan face here? They got kicked out of the League of Nations. They got outlawed. Whatever that means. They will face no repercussions. Okay? So 1932, the next year, they attack Shanghai. Over the next 10 years, guys, if you look at this map, okay, this gets into 1930, so 1931, 1936, Shanghai, okay, and then further and further as we get closer and closer to Pearl Harbor. Slave, disrupted me. I don't like it. Thank you. Okay, so what I need to talk about here, guys, is the Japanese. Okay, they have an emperor. Which time I got? Okay, finish here in just a few minutes. You can talk all you want. Okay, now the Japanese emperor is Hirohito. Okay, he's a young emperor, but the Japanese believe that their emperor is a descendant of the sun god. Okay? You know how some radical fundamentalist Muslims believe that if they die in the service of Allah, that they will receive great rewards in the afterlife? So if you're a suicide bomber and you kill yourself while you're killing infidels, you will receive what in the afterlife? And you guys know what that is? 72 what? 72 virgins. This is what fundamentalists, Islamic fundamentalists, believe if they kill themselves in the service of God. The Japanese, likewise, believe that if they die in the service of the emperor, that the afterlife, they will be greeted, treated as royalty. Okay? The Japanese are well trained and they're radical. Okay? The Chinese do not have much of a chance here. The list of atrocities committed by the Japanese are, guys, it's almost unfathomable to talk about. Have any of you guys heard of the rape of Nanking? Okay. So during the war, because, guys, this for 10 years, actually for 14 years, the Japanese will be fighting in China. 14 years. I think it was 1935. The Japanese went into Nanking, which is a city of about 300,000 people. The guy in charge is a guy named Prince Yasuhiko Asaka. And he gives the Japanese soldiers the order to kill Everyone. Okay? 250,000 people, innocent people, will be murdered by the Japanese. They like to use the sword. They like to cut off heads. Now, the women and the girls of Nanking would be raped and tortured before they were murdered. So the amount of rape here it's disgusting. Okay? This is one of the worst atrocities in human history. Now, I'm not trying to beat up on the Japanese. I mean, the Japanese today are one of our closest allies, one of our best friends in the world today. Okay, so I'm just talking about history here. Okay. Now, there's a really good book. Well, it's an important book called The Rape of Nanking. It's written by Iris Chang. Okay. Now, I know your book review has to be American history. I'll make an exception if anybody wants to read. It's hard to read, but I think it's a event in history that's important to be remembered. Now, Iris Chang, who wrote the book, is Chinese. So again, you have to look for bias here because she's Chinese writing about the Japanese invasion. Okay, so you got to take things somewhat with a grain of salt. But there's a couple really good movies on this I wanted to share with you guys. Okay, and some stories. So you don't have to watch the movie. I can tell you the story. But there's a really good movie called The War of the Flowers. You guys know Christian Bale, Batman? Okay. There's a Catholic church in Nanking. Okay. I've been to China and I've seen Catholic churches in China, and I was surprised when I saw a Catholic church. I was like, what's that doing here? Well, it's older than the Communist Party. You know what I mean? Communism came in 1948. Okay. So there were missionaries and so forth. Catholic church there in Nanking. Now, in this war here, the first time in human history we will see bombers used. So we used airplanes in World War I. We didn't drop bombs from them. So they built bigger planes and started dropping bombs on innocent people and cities and so forth in Japan. Well, at this Catholic church in Nanking, there was an orphanage of young Chinese girls that were orphans, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old girls. The bombing came in, and the priest at the Catholic church in Nanking was killed. So this Christian Bale character, this loosely based on a true story, is sent as the Undertaker to go to this church in a war zone, find the priest, and give him proper burial. And he's kind of this grifter character, Christian Bale. He's like, he likes to drink, he likes women, he's this guy, okay? And he goes to this church, and he sees all these young girls, these orphans. And he buries the priest. There's a wall around it. It's a wall with a gate. And he's like, well, I'm going to leave. I mean, that's what he came there to do, is give proper burial. But he starts to feel bad because if he leaves, he doesn't know what's going to happen to these girls. As the Japanese come in, and he's heard rumors about what the Japanese are doing to the women and the girls. Okay? So he stays. And he puts on the collar and pretends to be the priest. And when the Japanese show up at this church and they want in, he puts on a show. He's like, no, this is God's place. You cannot come into God's place. And he holds them off, putting his own life at risk for sure. This is based on a true story. But the Japanese are going to come back. And there's a twist in the movie where these geisha girls show up at the church seeking refuge. I don't know if you guys know what geisha girls are. These are Chinese prostitutes. So they show up at this church. Now Christian Bale's like, you guys can come in. I'm not going to ruin the movie, okay? Because what happens is, I mean, it's kind of heartbreaking, okay? But it's War of the Flowers, and it's on one of the streaming services. Really good movie, okay? Then there's one more movie I want to tell you about. How many guys have ever seen Schindler's List? Okay, that's pretty good. Listen, if you haven't seen it, guys, it won like 7 Academy Awards. It's a great movie. It's an important movie, okay? But it's about a German guy who was a Nazi that used free Jewish labor during the war to make a lot of money, and then has a change of heart and ends up saving over 2,000 Jews from being sent to Auschwitz. Those 2,000 Jews that he protected, their offspring today is over 50,000 people. So those 50,000 people would not exist had Oskar Schindler not saved them. Okay, so he starts out as a bad guy, but ends up a hero to the Jewish people. Does that make sense? Okay, so in a similar story, in Nanking, China, as the Japanese are coming in, there's a German factory. And you guys know, the Germans and the Japanese are allies. This guy runs the German factory using Chinese labor. Sound familiar? Okay, American companies, right? So there's a German company there. When the Japanese invade, most of the German employees flee the country. But John Rube, R-U-B-E, John Rube, who's the guy that runs the factory, stays. He puts a big German swastika flag on the roof of the factory. As Japanese bombers are coming into Nanking and bombing the city, they're going to see this Nazi swastika. And they won't bomb the factory. And then when the Japanese show up at his factory, and they're like, we need to kill these people. He's like, no, no, no. I'm German. I'm German. I need these workers. And he let the Chinese workers sleep in the factory so they didn't have to go home. He let some of their families come into the factory. Okay? And he saved them from the rape of Nanking. Okay? I know. He was a German. He was a Nazi. Okay. But still, okay, he saved a bunch of people, a bunch of Chinese from this massacre. Okay? Kind of a cool movie. Not really well done. The movie's not that good. Okay? But it's a good story. And it's based on a true story. Now, The War of the Flowers is well done. Very good movie. Rape of Nanking is black and white. It's hard to watch. It's brutal. Okay. So, just wanted to share that because that's an important event in world history. Okay. And so here's another thing I just want to talk about real quick. FDR is elected in November of 1932. FDR takes office in March of 1933. Do you know who becomes Chancellor of Germany in March of 1933? Adolf Hitler. Hitler and Roosevelt come to power in the same month of the same year. They will die within about a month of each other in 1945. So it's kind of interesting to watch. We're both in a depression. Germany's in a depression. We're in a depression. So if you can watch a parallel of the two nations, Germany and the United States, over that 13-year period, 12-year period, 13-year period, okay, and how these two leaders, because we elect Roosevelt 4 times, Hitler becomes a dictator, okay, using the German Constitution to become a dictator, okay. So that's something that we'll kind of look at as we go forward, okay. And then this last slide here, is what I've talked about over the last chapter. So I put the 6 causes together. Now, there's a question on the test. Okay, it's a 6-point question. How many do I have? Causes. 6 causes of the Great Depression. Now, I don't want you to just list them. I want you to explain them. So if it's worth 6 points, how many do you need to explain? How many? Thank you. Did you hear that? Everybody hear that? Okay. Good. Just trying to help you out. When's the test? Tuesday. What do we learn? Who are we learning about tomorrow? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay. Hoover's out. Okay. Good. Rock and roll.